Good afternoon. My name is Allison Kaplan. I'm Director of Education for the National First Ladies Library, located here in Canton, Ohio, at the National First Ladies Historic Site. There's a little PowerPoint going that has some of our upcoming programs and activities. I want to encourage you, if you are local to the site, to come and visit us. Our partners at the National Park Service run it, and we help by curating exhibitions of work from our collection, special loans, and recent acquisitions. We currently have an exhibition right now up on First Lady Nancy Reagan that takes a deep dive into Nancy's life, her time in the White House, her role as a support for her husband, and features some dresses and some amazing artifacts and items. But the one thing I want to mention to you that is relevant to our discussion today is that the National First Ladies Library recently acquired a collection of objects from Monty Durham, who you may know from Say Yes to the Dress Atlanta. And that includes a reproduction of Jacqueline Kennedy's wedding dress, which was originally designed and created by Ann Lowe, who we'll be chatting about today. And that dress, as well as other items from Monty's collection, will be up on view beginning in May. So this is sort of a kickoff to some of the programming that we're going to do around Jacqueline Kennedy, around the exhibition, and we're very excited to continue our discussion about Ann Lowe. The National First Ladies Library owns a number of the Avion perfume gowns that Ann made at the close of her life that were reproductions of dresses related to the First Ladies of the United States. So Ann Lowe is always a favorite historic figure of ours. Before we get started, I want to encourage you to use the chat. We love to see where you're from, to have you check in with us. If you have questions for our speaker today, you can put them in the chat, you can put them in the Q&A. I will try to dump some more information in there. And if I don't get to that today, you will get a follow-up email with a link to the program. If you had to check out, if you want to share this talk today with someone you're friends with, if you want to pass along the book title and information, I really hope you do, because it's an amazing book. But before we get started, I will stop sharing my screen, but I will tell you about some of the other upcoming programs. So this is our Legacy Lecture program. We meet usually the first Wednesday of each month throughout the school year to bring scholars and other notable speakers related to topics that involve the First Ladies of the United States. So today we're going to be chatting about Ann Lowe. Next month, we will be joined by Ann Robertson, who is a historian for the Girl Scouts, and she's going to be talking to us about the role that the First Lady of the United States played in the Girl Scouts and the Girl Scouts in the White House. So that is March 1st at noon. You can go to our Eventbrite page and sign up for it. We also have a really great program coming up on February 14th. I hope you will join us for Valentine's Day. We are going to be discussing a few different films this time around. You may have joined us in the past for our discussion of Grey Gardens, the Maisel brothers documentary about the cousins of Jacqueline Kennedy from the Bouvier family. Little Edie and Edie Bouvier. We are super excited to be continuing our discussion of Grey Gardens. We are paired up, as we usually are for our film series, with Stark Library, and they share film links with our participants so they can watch the films in advance. This time, since we've already watched Grey Gardens, we're going to watch a documentary called That Summer that takes you back to the time before Jackie and Lee got involved in helping to clean up the Grey Gardens home. But we are going to be discussing all things Grey Garden because we will have the marble faun himself, Jerry, with us, and we'll be talking about Jerry's memoir, his experience at Grey Gardens, meeting Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, his amazing life, his career as an artist. He's just a really, really interesting person, very unique, and I'm super excited to connect with him, and I hope you will join us for that program. Our talk with the curator is on February 16th. Our director of collections, Michelle Gullion, will be joining us for a look at an object in our collection. We will be talking about Mary Barber, Ida Saxton McKinley's sister, and a fan that she owned that is in our collection. And then our book club book for later this month is a biography of Alice Roosevelt. So as we talk to Piper, you'll see that that is another book that's very relevant to our discussion. So I hope that you can join us for some of these programs. And again, we will have even more programming that involves Jacqueline Kennedy and the amazing and interesting people in her orbit. So I hope that you can stick with us. And again, if you're having an AV issue, if you're having problems tuning in, if you've tuned in through Eventbrite, we recommend that you click out and into Zoom. But we also broadcast on Facebook. And again, if you have to leave at some point in the program, we will be sharing this out to participants so that you will be able to watch it. And I think that is all that I have to tell you related to housekeeping. And I'm going to try not to get as distracted by the chat, but you always share really great information about your experiences related to the First Ladies, about visiting historic sites, about experiencing different things, about sharing knowledge that you have. And we encourage you to do that in a kind and friendly way. And that's why we're here, because we're all interested in women's history and elevating the voices and histories of women and the First Ladies of the United States. So without further ado, I want to introduce our speaker who I will be in discussion with today. Author Piper Huguley made her historical fiction debut with By Her Own Design, a novel of Ann Lowe, fashion designer to the Social Register, which was named a Booklist Top 100 Editor's Choice selection for 2022, and one of the top 100 books of 2022 in Canada by the Globe and Mail newspaper. And I cannot more highly encourage this book. It is one of those reads that you open up and you just can't put it down. So we are going to be talking about that book today, but I want to tell you a little bit more about Piper. She is also the author of Sweet Tea and 2 historical romance series, Migrations of the Heart, about the Great Migration, and Home to Milford College. She has won a number of accolades for her romance titles, including being a 2-time Golden Heart finalist. She lives in Atlanta, where she is a literature professor at Clark Atlanta University. So I want to welcome Piper to our discussion today. And again, if you have questions for us, please type them in the chat or type them in the Q&A. And I will try to keep up with them. So welcome, Piper. It's so wonderful to have you here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. This is a thrill.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the book for those of us who might not have read it yet or may not be familiar with Ann Lowe's story?
Well, Ann Lowe most famously is known as the designer of Jacqueline Bouvier's wedding gown when she married, or was coronated in marriage, you might say, to John F. Kennedy in September of 1953. But she had a long career prior to that, decades long prior to that particular commission, in designing wedding gowns, as well as formal wear for first when she was in her home state of Alabama, women in the women who were wives of the Alabama state legislatures, the first lady of Alabama, when she moved to Florida, designing formal gowns for the wives of the citrus magnates in Florida, as well as being appointed in the 1920s, again, no small accomplishment, to the Gasparilla Court. If there's anybody out there from Tampa who knows about what Gasparilla is, really big deal down there right around this time of year, prior to her moving to New York, where she then, by word of mouth, as what was known as the best kept secret, designed for Roosevelt, DuPont, Marjorie Merriweather Post. So yeah, she had had a career as a designer, not a seamstress, way before that, for a number of decades. And so this story tells the story of how this Black woman started, being born in Jim Crow, Alabama in 1898, working her way through all of that in terms of what she did. It's really an amazing story. It's an American story. I like to point that out, even though it's the first day of Black History Month, and we're going to get to Women's History Month. I mean, it really very much is. We're thinking in terms of what it is for someone to come from a low standard and by sheer determination, their talent, etc., to bring themselves in line with an American dream.
And can you tell us how you came to the story of Ann Lowe, how you got involved in writing this book?
Well, I'm a longtime aficionado of the Kennedys, of presidential history, of first ladies, all of that kind of stuff. And always was looking for, how they were affiliated with Black people, what their feelings were, etc. I was looking for that part of that history in all of those places. And so I knew about Ann Lowe kind of in the back of my mind. I hadn't really paid much attention to it until I was on Twitter one day in 2018 and came across my editor, who had put out a request via a retweet of an article saying, who will write this book for me? And I had already pitched a previous project to her, and she wasn't really satisfied with, the shape of it or whatever. But when I saw that, I looked at the article that she retweeted. I went online, saw a couple of other things, and immediately wrote what we have as the prologue, which is what I'll be reading from here in a little bit, and sent it to my agent to send it to her and said, tell her I'm on this. Do not give it to anyone else in terms of that. So that's how I landed the contract, because I could immediately see, upon looking at what Ann's life was, that it could be made into a novel. Not everyone's life turns out to be that way, but it was clear from the things that I saw initially that a historical fiction novel could be told about Ann Lowe.
So can you read us a little bit from the book, just so we can get a taste of it, and then we'll talk about a little more about her life and about writing historical fiction.
Sure, and as I said, this is from the very, very beginning, which, and prior to this book, I would, some authors say they're prologue people, some people say they're not. Previous to this, I was not a prologue person, but now I am. So from this particular beginning part. New York City, New York, September 6th, 1953. By the end of my life, I was stone blind because I used up all of my eyesight, creating beautiful gowns for the richest women in the social register. However, on this one day, the Sunday before Labor Day in the year of our Lord, 1953, God laid his healing hands on my failing eyes so I could see a sharp cut on a water pipe in the ceiling of my dress shop. Cut wide open, maybe with a hatchet. That pipe spilled gallons of foul-smelling water onto the floor of the shop I had worked 20 years to open. The eggshell carpet, as well as the olive green gilt chairs my client sat on, got stained a sickening shit brown. When the landlord poked at them, the chairs squished and bubbled suds at the edges of the seat. I might have been able to take that in, but that wasn't the worst. No, the most horrible part was that the pipe had opened up over top of the most important dress commission of my life, the most important dress of the 20th century. The dress belonged to one Jacqueline Bouvier, who was due to marry John F. Kennedy in just 6 days' time. The rosettes on the ball gown skirt, my usual flower touch, seized up streaks of brown, and the off-the-shoulder bodice sagged completely off of the shoulders of the headless mannequin. The rest of the dress, saturated with yellow instead of ivory white, made sad-sounding drips of wastewater that plopped to my white carpet in a discordant symphony. Is it possible for anyone, even for a piddly bird-like little Black woman like me from small-town Clayton, Alabama, to have a lower moment? The Almighty himself put the thought in my mind. The water pump that dumped all of that stink into my shop didn't burst all by itself. Only now I cast my poor eyesight down to my trusty step stool, turned topsy-turvy behind the mannequin, in someone's haste to leave my life in a mess. Sally, my older sister, said the words that trailed across my mind like a dress scene. Who hates you enough to do this, Annie? Sally loved me so well, she couldn't see it. But even if I had my poor eyesight days, I saw it. I knew of a handful of people who had enough red-hot demon hate for me in their blood that they would relish to see me fall.
Thank you for that. That was fantastic.
Thank
So,
you.
one of the great things about historical fiction is how it really helps to bring these figures to life. And your book does such an amazing job of bringing Anne out, out of the page just to life. And I wanted to talk to you about the process of researching Anne and how you went about that. It's of special interest to our site because the book is dedicated to Margaret Powell, who was a historian who our director of collections and research here, Michelle Gullion, had worked closely with as she was doing research. And Margaret had come to the site and visited our site to see some of the dresses and to speak. So I'm really interested about your experiences unearthing some of Margaret's research and helping to bring that to life. So not only are you talking about Ann Lowe and getting her name out there, but also Margaret. So
Yeah.
how did you go about researching?
Well, when I went online right after that initial article, and could see what was available, I saw that Margaret had run her blog, etc. So there was a great deal of information. That's one of the initial resources I went to, and then learned as I did more research. I mean, the day that I found out that she was no longer alive, at the very young age, like 38, of breast cancer, it's just devastating. For me, I'd never even met her. I didn't even know her, but so much of as a scholar, knowing in academia, there's always this question of you're researching this thing, you're spending so much time, effort involved, absorbed in what you're doing. What happens to it if you die of something, And so I felt very keenly that connection to her, somebody I didn't even know, who worked and lived in my hometown of Pittsburgh, to at least get some of her work in some kind of way back out to the public. And one of the things I found out, of course, is that in the course of her research, she attained her master's degree from the Corcoran School, and that record was at George Washington University. So they very kindly forwarded me an electronic copy of her thesis, which formed sort of the backbone of some more elucidating of some of the points. She had done interviews with family members, that kind of thing that she had, as well as what she was doing in the thesis, which was a textural examination of Anne's work and craft and via her dresses. So I'm not a scholar of textiles or whatever as Margaret was, but that was another part of what it was that she was doing in terms of her thesis, which I believe is now available online, if I'm not mistaken. But really her making the case that this was not a mere seamstress, as Ann Lowe had been called so often in many places in Jacqueline's biographies, but that she was a fashion designer who had been erased for whatever reason from history. So thankfully, she had done a lot of that kind of work. It's difficult when you're dealing with a marginalized person in terms of some of the other aspects of finding out about their lives, using the traditional academic ways to do research. Doesn't work in the same way as it might for someone else. For instance, I knew that Ann Lowe didn't have a birth certificate because my great-grandmother was from the same part of Alabama, 2 counties over, born about 2 years before she was. My great-grandmother did not have a birth certificate. So it's sort of that kind of same thing that I was able to tap in for a serendipitous kind of way, to be able to begin to imagine what that first part of her life would be like, the most unknown part. That in some ways, I believe that Anne played a part in covering up herself because of the early child marriage and how she later discovered that in these higher class circles that she was circulating in, that was something that was not a thing that was acceptable in terms of behavior. So yeah, some of those things, particularly in the early parts of the story, have to be excavated, really, in a different way, particularly for historical fiction. So yeah, there's research in terms of, historical fiction, what I call the tent poles, fact, etc., but that they have to be, married with and brought together with some fictitious imagining, especially given that you're dealing with a marginalized person. Another way to sort of get around that too is that the other serendipitous thing that I'm a Zora Neale Hurston scholar. And so again, looking at where Anne came from, her time period, I knew that Zora Neale Hurston was also born nearby Alabama. Everybody affiliates Florida with Zora Neale Hurston, but she was actually born in Alabama, not that far from Ann Lowe. So I also brought that background in terms of my previous studies of a Black woman in a similar part of the country to Ann Lowe's early years. And that's the kind of thing you have to do when you're dealing with someone who does not have as much of a public life, particularly in the early years, as someone like Ann Lowe.
You did a really amazing job sort of taking the tent poles, but also crafting a novel around them. So creating, Anne's life has pretty amazing plot points in it to begin with, but I think that you took some of those unknowns and crafted them into something really special. That idea at the beginning of the piece that you read about, who could have done this? So you kind of needed a whodunit in some ways, and place that question in as part of the plot points. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about why historical fiction, what appeals to it about to you, and how you went about, you talked a little bit about how you went about doing the research, but how do you go about creating the novel around that?
Well, I, for a long period of time, I've been, as a scholar, been doing research, looking into particular aspects of what Black women's lives look like in the larger society. And before I taught at Clark, I taught at Spelman for 13 years, which is a historically Black college for women. One of the things I like to, it wasn't a game as much, but sometimes to talk with them as much as to try to get them to think about how often we don't see these Black women's lives depicted. So I would ask them, just, to see what they would know. How many biopics, that is biographical movies, exist that are based on real life Black women out there in the world, in terms of movies that were available to be watched and seen, or whatever. And so when I was teaching and filming in the 2010s, they came to an understanding that the numbers were abysmally low. Now, here in 2023, we're coming into something upwards of 15 to 20 of these movies existing. But between 2010 and like 2015, when I'd be playing this game with my students, they were less than 10. So the ways in which, movies like that get made, they often come from books, whether they're biographies or novels or whatever. And so from that point, about the 2010s, it became a bit of a mission of mine to see what could I do, what could be done in terms of getting more of these stories told by a historical fiction, which is what my wheelhouse is, in terms of getting more of those Black women's lives out there for potential biopic projects or whatever, at least to be better known in terms of that. And so when Ann Lowe I came across her in that serendipitous way. I was really glad of that. In terms of it, this wasn't even someone I had been thinking about, or someone that I had been talking to my students about, but that I certainly was glad to come across.
I wanted to ask you about some of the historical gaps that you found. Obviously, like a birth certificate is an example, but I think you were doing a lot of your research during COVID, so you didn't get to travel around and necessarily see the dresses. But one of the other things that I only recently saw was Ann's experience on the Mike Douglas show.
Oh,
And I
yes.
wanted to talk to you about that, because it sounded like you didn't see it until after you wrote the book.
Yes.
And it really brings Ann Lowe to life. And I wondered if it was a surprise to you to see it. Did it confirm a lot of things that you thought and felt about Ann, and how she moved, how she spoke, and how she frames her story?
Yes, that was one of the pieces that I was writing during the pandemic. And yeah, as an older person who had watched Mike Douglas unwillingly as a child, admittedly, because I would go to the babysitter's house after school and she would have it on, and we were always like, "Oh, put the cartoons on," kind of thing. But I knew, like, the Group W was in Philadelphia, and that somehow they would have taken. I was emailing everybody, like Museum of Radio and TV, etc. Nobody could tell me anything. I knew this piece of tape. Author Margaret had written about it. And listed it in her bibliography, but I couldn't get a hold of it. But yeah, I didn't get to see it until after the book was published. But it confirmed certain things for me, like that I knew that she was every inch the Southern lady. I knew that I was trying to tap into that aspect of Ann Lowe in terms of that. It also showed some very disappointing things, not in terms of Ann Lowe, but in terms of how Black women were treated. And one of those things, in terms of the way I talked about the Olivia de Havilland Commission, sort of that Ann Lowe did not get the credit for designing the dress that Olivia de Havilland wore when she won her first Oscar. The way that story came across, I structured it better. I told it better than what actually happened to her, which was heartbreaking for me, admittedly. But everyone should go take a look at that piece of film, even though it's in black and white. You have to use your imagination for the fashion show. It's just jaw-dropping in terms of what she created. I just can't even. Like the first time I saw it, particularly with that little shrug that she made this shrug, and I was like, I don't even understand how anybody could do that, right? It was like she made it look like it was fur out of this taffeta. How did that? I mean, just really incredible stuff.
We'll drop that link when we.
Oh, somebody
our,
dropped it.
oh,
Okay.
somebody did. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah,
make
the
sure
Mike
that-
Douglas show, the old Mike Douglas show. Yeah, it was like the color ones that I had seen from the 70s or whatever were more widely available online than this black and white version of the show from 1964, I think December 1964. And Mike Douglas himself came across quite different. I just sort of remember him as this, very kindly older white gentleman who did the talk show, whatever. And the way he comes across to her in 1964 is very different. I
yeah.
was unpleasantly surprised. Let me just say that.
I think with some people, the value of something is so important when you can't relate to it, whether it's art or fashion. So he's asking, how much would this cost? How much would you charge for it?
Repeatedly,
Which
yeah.
is so interesting because that was one of the issues Anne had throughout her life was the fact that it was a challenge for her to charge what she was worth, which was quite a bit. So she's creating for these affluent people who are part of the social registry, but often she's losing money. And you see a woman who's very proud and framing her story in a very interesting way. So she's, asked about creating the Jacqueline Kennedy wedding dress, but she's also asked, about her experience in design school, and she talked about discrimination. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the constant discrimination that she experienced throughout her life. I mean, if she weren't a Black woman during that time period, she would be a name, a major couture house at this point in time. But the way
potentially still,
describes those stories is very heartbreaking in the video. But you do an amazing job of bringing those stories to life. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that scene that you wrote where she goes to the design school and how she ends up there.
Yeah, well, and the whole fact is that in her life story that I found most intriguing is that there's this balance of the really overt, ugly discrimination that she faced in New York, I want to say, the whole, narrative about how the North is not bigoted or prejudiced. No. These things occurred to her in New York City. In terms of the difficulties that she faced in that school, but was championed. And as I think about it, as an artist who discovers a patron who sees her talent and wants to support that talent, not necessarily taking it for herself in terms of, oh, I want all of the Ann Lowe dresses for me and forget everybody else, but in terms of supporting this young woman in many ways by allowing her or, supporting her in terms of designing for other women in the Tampa community, as well as saying, maybe you should go to school and I can pay for that. And that's what Josephine Lee did. So yeah, Ann Lowe goes from Florida, where you're thinking she's going to face all of this overt racism in the 1920s, late teens, early 20s, to New York, where once they see her, try to act as if, okay, yeah, well, you don't belong here until she shows that she has paid and she is due. So this workaround, which is that kind of workaround that a lot of people have faced in terms of racism, I think, I'm not going to go into it, people can read the books right now, but exhibits that whole aspect in terms of what Black people have had to face, the whole aspect of blooming where you're planted and the whole notion is the phrase that's often talked about, making a way out of no way. That really brings home, Ann Lowe say, yeah, maybe you people don't want me here, but I'm going to succeed regardless of what your small-minded attitudes are. And it's really, really inspirational in that way. So yeah, for people who want to read the book, or there is an audio book. The audio book was someone that I got to select. The publisher was like, oh, here's your person and 4 other people. Would you rank them? I was like, I want Tracy. and for other people. I'm not ranking. I think that's who I want. And so Tracy does a really great job of narrating the audiobook that is widely available as well.
So the Jackie Kennedy dress was a major commission for Anne. Anne had worked with Jackie's family previous to the dress, but you write it as in the novel. It's a huge disaster in some ways because of she has to recreate the dresses because she has this major pipe burst. And so can you tell us a little bit about the drama that surrounded that incident?
Well, what's interesting, and even when you see her talking about it on the Mike Douglas, is about how she doesn't dwell on that, the particular aspect of it. And I really feel like it was a fire that she showed, and even in terms of something I don't include the book that she tried to do about it, to seek redress in terms of what had happened, which, as you mentioned, she attributed to a tub up above overflowing for overnight, that somebody after a party neglected to turn it off or whatever. And I saw that, her talk about that in contemporary accounts of the destruction or whatever. But as you're saying, in terms of getting a novel structured to pull people in, to keep them reading pages, I had to structure it like along a sense of whodunit, introducing the people in her life who might have had certain kinds of feelings towards her that might have sought, revenge type of feelings towards Ann Lowe. But the whole aspect of it, and what she has to do in terms of the follow-up. You can't go to Joseph P. Kennedy and say, oh, well, this happened. And she says in the Mike and Douglas interview, I just cried and cried, but I drank lots of coffee, and a lot of seamstresses, of which I'm not one, I just want to say, my mother was a seamstress. So I saw that, what she did. And she made, a lot of our dresses, except for my prom gown, etc. As I was growing up. So I knew that particular perspective of it, a miserable failure at it for myself, but knew that basically, well, I would say it's easier to make a dress a second time around once you've done it, but still 50 yards of ivory taffeta. It's incredible, her accomplishment.
And there's no doubt that Jacqueline Kennedy dress is a masterpiece, and it was kind of the showpiece that the Kennedys wanted to be created that would get the magazine coverage that they wanted to help propel him into the spotlight. But there's a lot of discussion around Jacqueline and whether she really liked the dress, whether it's the dress that she wanted. And what her feelings were about the dress. And you also do a really great job of framing that relationship and whether how Anne treated it and whether she felt that she kind of overstepped her boundaries of working with the family and working as a Black woman with a white wealthy family and addressing some of those needs. I wonder if you can speak a little bit more about how you talk about that in the book, because it is even a historic controversy that keeps erupting and appearing on Twitter and other places. So I wonder how you decided to approach that and treat it.
Yeah, I appreciate that you saw that in what I was trying to do there, because of course, from a 21st century perspective, our perspective is like, well, Anne should have done what Jackie wanted. And that is not the way in which, first of all, relationships with that women of that particular time, particularly white women, women in society work. We see all of this now, the bridezilla and all of this other kind of thing. The way that I had to look at Jackie in terms of depicting her, and some other people were like, well, Jackie's not in this book. No, this is an Ann Lowe book. It's not Jackie's book. She does not come until like the last third of the book for reasons, because Ann Lowe, when she designed this gown, was 55 years old. She had a lot of life before the commission. But the whole aspect in terms of Jackie was that she was not the global icon that we remember, but this young woman who, for a lot of reasons, I think, felt very nervous about marrying this particular man, as much as she was in love with him and everything, but probably knowing on some level who he was. She had seen it with her father. And quelling that. She'd already been engaged before, something that people hadn't, talked about. This was a job of a woman like Jacqueline at that time, to find the husband who was going to support you. And thinking about failing at that job, or the potential job of landing wealthy husband, again, was also, I think, part of what might have inhibited her from saying more about the dress, of going along to get along with what both the one aspect of that wedding that both her mother and Joseph Kennedy agreed upon was the outlying coronation, larger than life nature of that dress, how it had to be, rather than something with a sleeker, smaller silhouette. So many of those things came into play, as well as you're right, Ann Lowe's relationship with the family, which had been at that point one over several years. She did both the Deb dresses of Jacqueline and her sister Lee when they were both, for their respective years, Debs of the year. Her mother's wedding suit, which was the first commission that she did for the family. All of those things that came into play. And the question that I had when I was structuring the story, I was thinking about, so would it just have been the dress, or was there something else in terms of Ann Lowe that might have made this the last thing that she ever did for Jackie? And given the drama, the sort of the well-known drama of the wedding about Jacqueline's father, whether he was going to show up, how he was going to show up, was he going to be drunk or whatever, and tying that in with Ann Lowe's not having had a father ever, was how I decided to depict what Ann Lowe does in terms of stepping out of her place, supposedly, to say, in effect, Jackie, put your big girl panties on and do this. So we don't know if that's how it really went down, but the sort of the tentpole fact exists that, yeah, Ann Lowe never did another Jackie commission again. And so that's my job as the historical novelist, is to come in and structure why it might have been. And I think, for me, at least, a stronger reason was needed beyond that Jackie didn't like the dress. And all these other things she had done beforehand.
Mm-hmm. I wondered also if you can talk about this idea. Anne really prides herself on creating for women of the social registry, primarily white, wealthy women, and that she wants to be the best kept secret, but she then keeps encountering these times related to the Jackie dress, related to the de Havilland dress, where there's a moment where she could have propelled her career and her name is not shared. Right. And it's a big disappointment. Can you talk about that kind of struggle about creating for the elite, wanting to be a secret, but also this kind of letdown?
Well, there have been a number of Black readers who have, sort of wondered about that particular part. And this is what, in terms of my depictions of historical fiction, what to say. This is how someone who was Black in the first half of the 20th century, how you had to comport yourself. And, it may be unpleasant to look back on, unpleasant to think about in terms of that, but that was more historical reality in terms of, when these women wanted to nickel and dime her down on the price of the dresses. And only, as she herself said, I don't cater to every Mary and Sue. I designed for the women of the social register. The pride that she had taken in that, the historical legacy that she carried on from her mother, grandmother, and apparently also great grandmother, in terms of that, all of that, how that plays into it. That's reality. But part of the thing that was important for me, and I say again, this whole aspect of looking back from 2023 or 2020 when I was writing this, is thinking about, okay, looking at her career and saying, when did she make the decision to finally start doing dresses in a widespread fashion for Black women? And I tied it into her eye operation, when she sort of has a new eye, a new way of looking at things. Also, the fact that the 60s had come along is when she, changes her viewpoint on that particular aspect of her career. And, not heaping tons of guilt, etc., on her about that, but just like with that somehow potentially maybe with the eye operation, the times, civil rights, etc., that allowed her to see anew that she should be servicing other clients as well. So, and this is one of the reasons why I think that one of the civil rights I'm most proud of, I didn't put it into my biography, that Parents Magazine listed it as one of the ways for children 12 and up to learn about Black history. So that's why I'm really proud of that, and said it's hard, but
I wonder if I'm not a seamstress and you aren't a seamstress, but I'm gonna put up some pictures so our audience can get a sense and see Ann's work and some pictures of Ann. This is not the one I want to show you. Hold on one second. Because her process of creating is so amazing. There's just so much care that goes into what she's doing, and the creation of the flowers and how that creating from scraps of found or leftover pieces, and then the way that she creates this internal system, so the dresses don't have they have a built-in bra in them, I think is so fascinating and interesting. So we have some images of Ann. This is the cover of your book, which I think does such a great job of framing her, but also taking some historical photographs, and she's always kind of dressed in this very chic, fashion forward, almost French way that she wants to look really amazing. She's wearing black, but she's almost understated because it's not about her, it's about the dress. And we get a feel for some of those Gasparilla dresses that she's created. These, I think, were some of the photographs that were taken for magazine features, but here you can see her creating those trademark flowers. And there she is. These are the perfume gowns that I wanted to have you speak about as well. You do such a great job of talking about Ann later in her life, and how her eyesight changes, and how times change and fashion changes, and how she's taking on different commissions, and the Evelyn perfume gowns, which were I think it came out of one of the people that she worked with quite a bit to make dresses, who was looking to create, and this is kind of a very old school thing, this idea that you would create this traveling department store exhibition that would feature first lady gowns. And here, those are the gowns Here she is. Here she is with her sister.
Yes.
That was
Mhm.
really interesting.
Yeah, and Sally with being much fairer skinned, which is one of the things that I talk about in the book. Gorgeous.
And of course, there's the Olivia de Havilland dress, which was so unique
Yes,
because she painted on the flowers.
by hand, not by stencil, as she talks about in the Mike Douglas interview, which to me really blew me away and gave me a new appreciation for this dress.
And I think you really did an amazing job of rewriting this story because you made it so much. There's so much more dimension to what you wrote, that in real life it sounds like Sonia asked her to make just a really amazing dress.
Yeah, yeah.
She has this encounter with Olivia de Havilland in the book, and she also goes to France and runs into her. So
Yes.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about this dress while we have it up on the screen and how you wrote that scene.
Well, yeah, and that's a couple of those things that I wanted to that weaving in Olivia de Havilland as a minor character allowed me to do was in terms of the ways in which Black people seemingly thought about her as an actress, even in Gone with the Wind, a movie that some Black people didn't necessarily feel fondness for, but that her particular character in it, the way that she was depicted, was something that I think got inscribed onto her. Um, Also, the notion of, like you're saying, that Sonia just asked her to design this marvelous dress. It never occurred to me that she would never have met her in person. So I out of the Gone with the Wind aspect, this particular commission, as well as the trip that Anne did take to Fashion Week in France, as not as a designer, but as a journalist for a Black newspaper, and having the little encounter with Dior, who appreciated Ann Lowe's designs, etc. That all happened to work in terms of me structuring the novel. So that's why I did it that particular way. But I still, when she said this, that I just assumed that it was a stencil, that somebody could not possibly hand draw that on fabric
Mhm.
without such a thing. I just marvel at it.
And that she made that kind of breakthrough of like in the book, you say she doesn't want the dress to be heavy. And so
Right.
that she painted, but it's so gorgeous.
It's amazing.
And here's the Kennedy dress.
Yes, famous wedding gown at the wedding.
And I wanted people to get a sense of, you talk so well about the veil too in relationship to the dress. I think it's really
The
nice.
Lee heirloom is her mother, as well as her sister Lee, who had, been married a few months prior to Jackie. I think there was another pressure on Jackie as well, that her younger sister had, quote unquote, beat her to the altar, but I think Lee maneuvered to do that. And having that wedding veil be part of it. Just gorgeous.
And the bridesmaids dresses. So the idea
Mhm.
that Anne not only had to create the wedding dress, but all of these bridesmaids dresses as
All the
well.
bridesmaid dresses with the pink and the claret sashes, as well. Just, yeah, very, typical silhouette for the 1950s at that particular point in time.
And so
Here she
here are some
is,
of the coverage.
more flowers. That's Jackie's, I think, half sister. So there's some of the other members of the family that she also designed for, even after she didn't design for Jackie Moore. There were other members of the Auchincloss family. No, Nina's the stepsister. That's right, stepsister. She also designed for Jackie's half sister, Janet Auchincloss. But yeah, Deb dress, gorgeous.
This is probably one of my favorite Ann Lowe dresses.
Yes,
I love
yes,
this
oh, love
ruffling
that.
bow
Gorgeous.
and the Gasparella dresses
Hmm.
and the trademark flowers. This is one from the Met.
Beautiful.
And then we should mention that there's an exhibition that will be opening soon, I think in the next.
In September, it's in commemoration for the 70th wedding anniversary of Jack and Jackie in at the Winter Thur in Delaware. So I think it starts September 9th and goes to the beginning of 2024. So yeah, Winter Thur, WINTERUR.org.
That's in.
I've not done anything official with them yet, but I'm certainly hoping so.
And here's the interior of one of the dresses, so people can see just how elaborate her design was, that she sewed this interior bra.
Very aware of lines and VPL and all of that other kind of stuff. It's not having that interfere with the dress. It's gorgeous. And the label, all important label there as well.
And this is from our site, the National First Ladies Historic Site, which owns both a number of dresses of those miniatures that were created by Anne, as well as some others that were not created by Anne. But just to give a feel for what those Ann Lowe dresses look like, and Piper, you do such a great job of describing them. It's amazing to me that you didn't get to be face to face with some of that based on the description. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you as far as like getting in front of that exhibition, and if there's another short story or another.
Well, some of the things, and I think some of the people in the chat are alluding to certain things, like I think someone in the audience who's, I think it was her great grandmother who had shop with Ann Lowe. If I put all the shops that Ann Lowe had into the dress, people would have, probably not want to read the book as much as intense, but it's that kind of thing that can be more included, I think, in potential adaptations, which, that's something that hopefully will happen again to bring Ann Lowe, her name, her work, her life story to even wider public attention, say, not just for me or whatever, but to make sure that the history that exists out there, fashion designers, doesn't just stop or end at a particular point. It is more inclusive to say that these things were way more widespread than people would think. And yeah, so that's part of the goal. You sort of, oh, you didn't conclude this or you forgot that. Yeah, well, this woman lived, some, 80 years. So couldn't all be in a book, but might be better served in terms of adding it in potential adaptation, maybe hopefully limited series.
Well, we're all someone's asking about a possible movie adaptation.
Yeah, I hope so. Reading the book, hopefully, and spreading the word might help more with that. Yeah, but I think someone else also had the question about her descendants. No one had taken up a fashion design as a career, but her great granddaughter still lives in New Jersey, is very much a keeper of her flame, as you will, and has really given some incredible insight into what it was like to grow up with Nana, as she called her, and particularly more towards the end of her life, especially after she retires in 1972, because of her eyesight, but still having a sharp, keen mind in terms of being engaged as an artist and what that's like living with her. So fascinating other parts of history that I've gotten to hear about. So hopefully we'll see. Fingers crossed.
And very helpful. And then I wondered if you could talk about, there's another recent book that came out, Jackie and Me, that approaches Jacqueline Kennedy by framing the story around a different person, one of Jack Kennedy's friends who happened to be gay. So I love this idea of using framing taking the Kennedys, but using it to frame someone else in the story. Can you talk about any other historical fiction that you can recommend out there?
Yeah, this is so funny because this happened to be 2022 seemed to be here to bring Jackie up in historical fiction. There was a book back in the late 90s. It's called Jack by Jackie. Jackie by Jack, yeah, that's right, Jack by Jackie, which was this parallel thing of this scholar who was writing her dissertation about Jacqueline Bouvier. And so she uses parts of her life to intersperse what her struggle is currently with her world, her trying to get her degree, etc. And then like it like disappeared or whatever. So it's like in 2022, these three came up. My book with Jackie is a secondary character. Lou's book, as you mentioned, Jackie and Me, with her as a primary character, and then Jacqueline in Paris by Ann Lowe, also being released last year. So it's very, very interesting in terms of the fact that those books came out. And like I said, the most sort of thing in common that Lou's book, Jackie and Me, has with mine is like the thing, filtering her through this other sensibility, particularly where Lem Billings, again, as somebody who's a Kennedy aficionado, knew about in terms of what that relationship would have looked like. Which, you know, from some people's perspectives, in terms of thinking about presidential marriages and all of that other kind of stuff, much more rough and rocky. And I think not just because of what people have come to understand as his infidelities and everything, but even Jackie's struggle in terms of what kind of identity, how much of herself should she give up, give into this, you know, the ongoing issues that she had with her fertility and the Kennedy sisters and the contrast there. So many things to deal with that do filter her through this new light. So I do look forward to what you guys are going to be doing in terms of exhibition. When you said Monty stuff, I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, man, good time to come to Ohio.
Visit us. We would be happy to have you and anyone else attending this program.
Yeah,
We will have a number of virtual programs and activities, as well as some in-person activities. But the last thing I want to ask you about is you have another historical fiction book in the works, and it involves Alice Roosevelt. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about it.
Yes, American Daughters, which I have finished and I'm awaiting my edits on, is about the secret, not known interracial friendship between Alice Roosevelt, who of course is the daughter of Theodore Roosevelt, and Portia Washington, who is the daughter of Booker T. Washington. So many people know about the kerfuffle that came up whenever Theodore Roosevelt came well, he came into the White House as a result, of course, of the assassination of McKinley. But one of the first things he did was invite Booker T. Washington to dinner, and he didn't think that was going to be a big deal, but it was like this great uprising that happened in the press with having to having the temerity to involve a black man at dinner at the White House. And that he kind of snubbed him a week later. And so this friendship that came out of course, people know about Alice Roosevelt, her rebellious streak, you know, what way to like get more in her father's face than to like have a black friend or something like that. But, you know, also sort of very much looking at the whole notion of interracial friendship at such a particular point in time, which has always been a theme that I've always been interested in. And as well as, you know, this whole notion I'm always curious about in terms of First Lady, you know, in terms of what that means, the kind of things that Alice was willing to do for her father, the things that Portia was willing to do on behalf of her father, and did that overshadow their own relationships, their own marriages and stuff, but that they had this bond in common that people, you know, I think hopefully this will shed some light onto that.
Well, I'm super excited to read it. And again, we're reading a biography for our next book club about Alice Roosevelt. So I'm sure
I've used a lot of Stacy's research. Stacy was one of the two places that mentioned this secret. The other Alice biographies, but Stacy's was the one that mentioned this friendship that gave me the idea in the first place.
Well, we'll definitely have your book as a pick when it comes out for sure, so we can follow up on that conversation. Piper, this has been a great conversation. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm sorry we couldn't follow up with all the questions in the chat, but we will send out an email to all participants with a recording of this. We'll also include that Mike Douglas YouTube link and some other related things that have been mentioned in the talk, including titles. And it looked like, based on our chat, that people were already connecting with their local bookstore online or their library and putting things on hold or checking things out on Libby. I know
Thank you
at
for that.
our local library, Stark Library, has a wait list for the book.
Good.
So,
Yeah.
so Piper Huguley, thank you so much for being on this program today as part of our legacy lecture. And this has been a really great chat. We could chat with you all day about Ann. Just a fascinating, amazing, important figure in history. So thank you so much. This has been a great program. We encourage people to check out further programs offered by the National First Ladies Library. We'll send that link to our Eventbrite. Our website is under construction currently. We hope to have a new one in the next year, and we'll have it up there. And we want to encourage people to connect with Piper too and check out her books.
Absolutely. Please do. I'm social media, Piper Huguley, pretty much Facebook, Twitter, as well as Instagram. So.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for attending today and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.